What We Pretend We Can't See by Gyzym. Chapter 4. That's Friday. Harry goes back to the office after he leaves Malfoy's and then calls it a day an hour early, begs off dinner with Ron and Hermione, and makes a Tesco's run instead. He goes home and soothes himself with cooking a complicated French dish he'd always liked making as a kid, and which, as an extra treat, his Uncle Vernon had loathed with a passion. He can't remember what it's called, but it tastes good. Chicken and wine and onion and garlic, and the act of throwing it together grounds him, helps him shake off the dark mood that dogged his heels all afternoon. So Malfoy's an unpleasant git who prefers anyone's company to Harry's. What else is new? It's never bothered Harry before, and he goes to sleep with a full belly and a firm conviction that it doesn't this time either. It doesn't. On Saturday, he wakes up early, refreshed and restless, and finds himself at a loose end until the monthly roundup his friends are having that night at the pub. He goes to work, has gelato from the cart up the street for breakfast, liberates Malfoy's records from his cubicle, and takes them home. It becomes clear, as the day wears on around the armchair where Harry sits poring over them, that Malfoy at 25 has already lived quite a life. There are travel records, as painfully meticulous as the rest, of trips Malfoy has taken for research or to retrieve artifacts for the museum. He's been to the Australian outback and the steppes of Russia, the States, the Amazon, the Savannah. He's been to most of the major cities Harry can think of, Athens and Rome and Mumbai and Sydney, Cairo and Hong Kong, Moscow and Bogota. They're just little trips, all of them, never more than a few days, never long enough to absorb the culture, eat the food, talk to the locals, but still. He's been. He's seen for himself. Harry's never really been anywhere, discounting one disastrous holiday in Avignon with Ginny that ended in tears and sunburn, unhappy silences. It's one of those things he's always wanted to do, travelling, but between one thing and another he never quite manages to find the time. Harry realizes, uncomfortable to think that it's happened without his noticing, that he's put the idea of walking the world into the box in his brain where he keeps marrying Gin or being raised by people who love him. Things he knows won't happen. Dreams he's had to let go. He slams the files closed, eats leftovers for dinner, and goes down to the pub. It's fine for the first hour or so. It's fun. It starts with just him and Ron and Seamus, the way it had in the old days, back when this little monthly gathering had been nothing more than a few old classmates trying to wipe clean a month's worth of orating with drink. Harry has a fire whiskey, indulges in a bit of office gossip. Seamus, in particular, can't seem to help himself, and shouts with laughter at a story about Trent, their newest junior aura, nearly soiling himself during a routine pixie roundup. Others start rolling in after a while, as they always do. Over the years, their monthly wind-down night at the Bawdy Bowtruckle has evolved into a proper piss-up, and people flit in and out of the rotation as they have the time. It's people they knew in school, mostly, some work colleagues and friends of friends, a few stragglers they've picked up just from the sheer consistency of their meeting time and place. It's nice, Harry tells himself. It is. He doesn't miss his quiet nights with Ron and Seamus, or sometimes Ron and Hermione and Seamus and Dean at all. Hermione shows up first tonight, having pawned Rose off on Molly for the evening. She's followed shortly by Luna. It's good to see her, and Harry slides over in his booth to make room for her and her latest paramour, a girl called V, with pink hair and a piercing through her tongue. He orders another round, and Dean shows up, kissing Seamus hello as he pulls up a chair, and then George and Angelina, and then Neville and Ginny. Harry's eyebrows raise in surprise. They don't come often, but Neville gives him a cautious, questioning smile, and Ginny's nervous little wave about breaks Harry's heart. Maybe the encounter at Malfoy's broke some of the awkwardness somehow. It wouldn't be the strangest thing Harry's ever seen do that job. The winner of the contest now and probably forever being Troll Boogies. Despite himself, Harry's mood sours a little to think of Malfoy. He orders another drink. And it's still fun after that. Of course it's still fun. People keep pouring in until it's so crowded in their corner of the bar that Harry can't really track who's coming and going, but that's fine. Who needs to do that anyway? He orders another drink and definitely doesn't mind that it's too loud to have a conversation with anyone. It's a good time, a chance to let loose, to get out on the dance floor. Not that Harry dances, never good at it with a partner and too hopeless to even consider making the attempt by himself, but he's sure it's just as much fun to watch. He's not at all bothered when he flags down the waitress for another round that it takes him 3 tries to get her attention over all the shouting, laughing buddies, or that when she reaches him, she looks overwhelmed and frantic. His fire whiskey is delicious, and absolutely no part of him is screaming at the top of its lungs that he can't see either of the exits and wouldn't be able to spot a threat in this crowd until it was too late. It's great, really, a blast. Harry's having a fabulous time. It's only after about the 6th drink that Harry can admit to himself that he's well and truly miserable. This, too, is a regular feature of these pub nights, although, admittedly, Harry doesn't tend to remember all that much of this part in the morning. He slouches a little in his seat. He's got the corner booth, his back to the wall, which always seems to be where he ends up. Not that anyone ever calls him on it, but he's got his reasons, could defend his choice admirably if anyone were to bother. It's the most easily defendable position in the whole place, and Harry doesn't like to have his back exposed while he's this drunk, in this big of a crowd. God, there are too many people. The boat truckle's got to be over capacity, and technically it's his job to check. He's not going to, but it rankles anyway. A splinter under his skin he can't quite manage to worry loose. His ears are ringing a little with the volume of the place, a headache beating on the door at the back of his skull. All that fire whiskey he's downed is currently holding shut. Which is fine, of course, since it's not like anyone's talking to him, because, of course they're not, because in times like this, on nights like these, they've all got people to talk to. Ron and Hermione are laughing breathlessly on the dance floor, and Seamus and Dean are snogging for England in the corner. Luna and her latest have vanished, probably to the women's toilet and probably for a good while. Angelina is draped across George's lap with her fingers in his hair, smiling and smiling at him. The worst of it is the way Neville and Ginny are standing by the bar, their heads bent and towards one another, face lit with the simple pleasure of sharing space. It's all just so wonderful that Harry could choke on it. The thought's unfair, leaves him guilty just for thinking it, even though he knows he's just vicious with drink and exhaustion, and how much he really, if he's going to be honest with himself, hates every last part of this particular experience, and has more or less every time. It's not like he can say so, though. They're his friends, and they like having him here, and it's important to be social, and they just worry about him if he started begging off. Anyway, it's not like Harry has anything better to do. He glares down at his fire whiskey. There are a few nearly melted cubes of ice floating forlornly in it. A smudge of something that looks like lipstick on the side of the glass, and Harry finds his mind suddenly filled with images of the little spread the wet bar at Grimmauld Place pulled up for him the day before. That glass, which had looked sturdy, solid, like it had some real heft to it, some weight. That perfectly spherical ball of ice, that warmly appointed study, all wood and leather, where you could have a conversation or hear yourself think. Sometimes on nights like these, Harry walks the crowded bar and looks for something. Some guy or girl who will smile at him, kiss him messily in the street, follow him home, stay until morning. He finds it, even not always, but usually, when he puts in the time. And though it's never once made Harry feel even half as good as he'd hoped it would, there are months where it's better than nothing. There are months when Harry feels so drunk, so alone, so doomed to sit forever with his back against the wall and no one to talk to, that it's worth the sinking sensation of the morning after just to have a warm body to ward off the cold. Not tonight, though. Tonight, Harry sits and sips his 7th glass of fire whiskey and thinks about that stupid room and that stupid house that he sold to stupid Malfoy. He didn't even want the damn place until he knew it was Malfoy's. Not that he wants it now, he corrects himself quickly, taking another sip. He doesn't want anything of Malfoy's. It's just galling is what it is. It's galling, and he's galled. God, he's drunk. He's too drunk. He doesn't want to be here anymore. In this awful bar. He hates this bar. The bar and the crowd and the noise and the house. And he runs into somebody hard in his haste to beat a retreat to the front door. "I'm terribly sorry," says a familiar voice. Slowly, as if moving through water, Harry looks up into the face of a handsome black man, who he wouldn't be able to identify as Blaise Zabini if he hadn't been essentially eavesdropping on him that afternoon before. Being an adult, Harry thinks with the conviction of the truly sourced was supposed to be more dignified than this. He knows it was, he's just sure. "Zabini," Harry says instead. "Right, Blaise Zabini from school?" Zabini nods, looking pleased. "And you're Harry Potter, of course. I don't think we've ever run across each other much at Hogwarts. I'm surprised you remember me." "Ha!" says Harry. "Pardon?" says Zabini, cocking his head to one side. Says Harry and tries frantically to come up with something to say that isn't, "Of course I don't remember you. I know we went to school together and all, but I'm pretty sure that I've never actually laid eyes on you before. I just recognized your voice from when I was secreted away on Malfoy's second-floor landing yesterday, listening to you ask him if he was keeping me as a prisoner. Nothing but unprofessional about that, right?" He settled for almost anything else. His mind unhelpfully spits back nothing but an image of a bottle of fire whiskey with a sign sticking on the top that reads, "Careful, I bite." So, hooray for that. Quite drunk, Harry admits, because it seems the better part of valor in this moment, and also because it's true. Zabini looks amused. "You shock me, Mr. Potter." "God, Harry, please," says Harry, waving a hand. "I hate when people call me Mr. Potter. It makes it sound like I'm somebody who knows, when times are coming." "I'll take your word for that," says Zabini slowly. "And it's Blaise, if it's Harry." "Blaise," Harry declares, drawing himself up to his full height, which is still about 3 inches shorter than Blaise's, and clapping him hard on the shoulder. "Great talk. I'm going to go outside and vomit in a bush now." And then, a man of his word, he does so. When he straightens, head swimming, and stumbles back a few steps, a hand lands between his shoulder blades and stops him from overbalancing. Harry turns, expecting Ron, but it's Blaise Zabini again, and wearing a wry expression this time. "Are you like," Harry says, and grimaces, trying to remember the word. Follow me?" Blaise makes a face and then mutters something Harry can't quite hear, but which sounds like it might be, "Merlin, help me." Then he smiles at Harry, which is friendly. "No, Harry, but what a perfectly salient question. I'm not following you. I just happened to be walking into the bar, and you just happened to be walking out of it, and as luck would have it, I was actually hoping to have a brief chat with you. And as we seem to have met so fortuitously, if you have a moment." He gestures over the nearby bench, which is at least A, not the bar, and B, quiet, and C, not the bar, and where he clearly means for Harry to go and sit. Says Harry. "I mean, sure, I suppose, if you don't mind, or that I probably won't remember. Tomorrow?" "That might be better for everyone," says Blaise. Cryptic bastard, these Slytherins. No truck for it at all. Blaise steers Harry over to the bench and then sits down on it next to him, his whole body angled towards Harry. For a horrified second, Harry thinks that it's a come on, which, hey, not that Blaise isn't a bit of all right, but it's not like Harry can go around sleeping with Malfoy's friends. That'd be weird. It's just for a second anyway, because before Harry has the chance to really spiral deep into the awkward, sweaty, drunken panic, Blaise says, "So, how are things going with Malfoy?" Harry freezes, one hand that he was planning on using to scratch his nose hanging stupidly in mid-air for too long before he notices and drops it. "With," he says and stops. "What are you saying about?" "The case," Blaise pushes, "and, Malfoy in general. How does he seem? If you had to rate his sanity on a scale of 1 to 10, just for example, where do you think you'd place the marker?" Says Harry. "Which end is the mad one?" Then he thinks for a second and squints at Blaise and adds, "Hey, wait, wouldn't you know better than I would?" "You think so, wouldn't you?" Blaise says, settles back against the bench, nodding thoughtfully. "You're very astute, Harry Potter. I'm sure people appreciate that about you. The strange thing, though, and stay with me now, is that Draco's a completely balmy little terror who never tells me when something is wrong. I mean, for Merlin's sake, I had to find out about the break-in through my channels." "What channels?" says Harry. Or at least the little part of Harry that is an aura every second of every day, even when he's in the shower or asleep. You should have yourself checked for head trauma, you know. Ordering is a dangerous job, says Blaze, only smooth. And of course, we're also grateful for what you do. It's really an inspiration. I donate to the department every year. My point is, I would like to know if you suspect Draco to be in any actual danger. You know, as a talented, qualified professional whose opinion I implicitly trust to make me feel safe. I'm sorry, but do you mean to tell me that is... Harry says, gesturing between the two of them, making an incredulous face. Is a professional conversation right now? And then, in a contribution from his tiny, hardwired aura brain that has been yelling, constant vigilance, for several minutes adds, wait, is that why you're being all with the, very weird flattery? And the thing with the donations good, that's well made, really the very wrong way to go there. Barking up the wrong, thing with leaves. Blaze stares at him for a long moment, face scrawled over with almost comical dismay. Harry resists the urge to snicker, fails, and hides it badly behind his hand. Blaze's eyes widen, and then he puts a hand to his temple and lets out a snicker of his own. Merlin, saggy balls, I see it. Not for myself, of course, but for him. Blaze stops, drops his hand, looks at Harry again, and lets out a huge peal of laughter, tipping his head back. It takes almost half a minute before he collects himself enough to say, Oh, it all makes perfect sense. God, if only I could go back in time and tell myself years ago. It could have been so much funnier. What are you talking about? Harry says, squinting at him. Did he lose his glasses again? He feels like he's squinting a lot. Nothing. You imagined it, Blaze says, tone abruptly switching back to neutral presentness, and sweeps right on to... Look, Potter. Don't call me Potter. He's tired. His eyes are drooping. Only Malfoy calls me Potter. I want you to know I literally couldn't make this up, Blaze tells him earnestly. He pulls a notebook out of his breast pocket, rips out a page, and writes something on it. Then he holds the little piece of paper up in front of Harry's face. Harry, yes, hello? Okay, this is my address. I'm going to stick it on your wallet, and if Malfoy is ever in danger or doing something really, really mental, you owe me, right? I already told you, Harry says grumpy, eyes falling shut again already, barely slittered when he says, I'm not going to remember anything tomorrow. I think I'm sort of operating on the same principle as hypnosis at the moment, Blaze says, sounding thoughtful. You know, the theory you're so far gone I'm actually tapping into your subconscious mind just by sitting here and saying things at you. It's a bit of a flyer, I'll admit, but I'm hopeful it might work out. Sure, Harry says. You do that. He closes his eyes. Harry's dreaming of the war. It doesn't happen very often anymore, rarely enough that usually these days when he finds himself in the tent in the Forest of Dean or walking Bathilda Bagshot's horse, he knows that he's dreaming. The knowledge never seems to be quite enough to change anything. He still has to sit and watch it all play out. But it's become a strange sort of comfort that he knows the ending, that he can't affect it either way. Tonight, he's at Grimmauld Place, back when it was Grimmauld Place, Sirius' ill-favored childhood home, and not the airy open museum Malfoy seen fit to turn it into. There is dust on every surface, the walls are grey, and in a minute Remus is going to walk through the door, and Harry is going to say vicious, horrible things to him. That's what happens there. That's how this part goes. Remus will come, and Harry will say those things that will be some of the last things he ever says to Remus. Those things that will haunt him for years. It will hurt, and then he'll wake up, and it will still hurt, but at least it will be over. There's nothing unpredictable about any of it anymore. Except... Potter, a voice says. Harry turns away from the door and sees Malfoy. In a chair, at the same table, in the same room, except it's later. Except it's now. All at once, the space around Malfoy folding seamlessly into clean lines and polished counters, the only dust visible, the motes falling through sunbeams and catching the light. Potter, Malfoy says, head tilting curiously. Where are you? Harry blinks at him, stunned. Maybe he's not dreaming, but he must be. The real Malfoy wouldn't be asking him such an uncannily perceptive question, would he? Harry's not sure. Harry's not sure suddenly, and when he tries to open his mouth to give his answer, he finds he can't remember how to vocalize it. He's here, he thinks, and not here. Here and where here used to be. A furious thump, thump, thump. "Potter," Malfoy says. He scrapes his chair back from the table, stands up and walks over to Harry, stoops to lean over him. Harry looks up with wide eyes, wondering what in the hell is happening, and frozen with these words, too, trapped in his mouth. He just sits there, the thump of his heart growing louder as Malfoy's face gets closer and closer until it's barely an inch away. Until he can see little flecks of gold and blue and the cool grey of Malfoy's irises. Malfoy takes a shaky breath, lips parting, and yells, "Open the bloody door!" Harry's eyes slam open. He's home, Harry thinks, clearly. Bed, no, sofa, also pain. He wiggles his body a little just to ensure that it's not pain with any kind of critical and dangerous focal point, like the time he came home after a bust without stopping by medical with what he thought was a minor hex wound, only to wake up with one of his arms completely covered in oozing sores and starting to smell dead. He concludes that it hurts to move, but not in a life-threatening way. His headache feels life-threatening, a little. Harry thinks it's probably not helping that somebody's pounding on his door. "Oh!" Harry says in the sofa cushion. Maybe, he thinks hopefully, it's a bear. If he doesn't engage it in conflict, it would go away and leave him to die. "I swear to God, Potter," calls a voice Harry knows full well does not belong to a bear. "I know you're in there, and if you don't open this bloody door right now, I won't be held responsible for my actions." The pounding redoubles as though Malfoy, because of course it's Malfoy, is now using 2 fists to ruin Harry's life with sound instead of one. Harry says with feeling this time. The sofa, of course, offers him no words of comfort. He sits up. The whole experience is supremely awful. His mouth tastes like cat's peed inside. "Stop knocking!" Harry calls out, even though the act of doing so is an agony. God, why does he have to do this to himself? He feels around for his glasses until he finds them on the side table, slips them on. "I'm coming, just stop." For a second, the knocking does stop. Then it starts up again, harder and faster, and with an additional aspect to it that Harry suspects strongly means that Malfoy is kicking the door at will. "I hate my life," Harry tells his coffee table, which, being a coffee table, pretty much just sits there in response. He gets up, he shuffles over to the door, he opens it. Malfoy stares at him, with his mouth parted, and his fists raised, clearly mid-knock, and makes a little noise, like whatever he was about to say has died in his throat. Harry gets that. Something has clearly recently died inside of his throat also. "Potter," Malfoy says, blinking after a second. "This is not what I was expecting." Harry looks at Malfoy standing in a doorway for his apartment with a sheaf of papers balled up in one hand, hair wild and face red, at what can't be later than 6:30 in the morning. The only thing he can think of to say is, "Why?" "Horrifyingly enough, I think my expectations were too high." Malfoy peers in at Harry, eyes raking over him with the air of a man who just found a rotting fish in his garden. "I assumed, at the very least, you'd be semi-conscious and wearing a shirt. But here you are, a walking corpse who smells like he's been bathed in fire whiskey. This is a difficult moment for me, Potter, I won't lie. To think that I actually overestimated your ability to be a functional person is really quite appalling." "I'm just a bit hungover," Harry says on a cracking yawn, having concluded somewhere in the middle of Malfoy's little tirade that that's what's going on. He twists his face in a grimace at a particular brutal stabbing sensation behind his eyes and tries to think. "And I meant, why are you here, where I live, being all loud and very loud?" Malfoy's face, which had been looking mostly, well, kind of half curious, half horrified, freezes and then twists up with cold fury. He shoves at Harry's chest hard enough that Harry stumbles back a little and steps into the apartment, slamming the door behind him. The sound is colossal, and Harry winces. "Oh, did that hurt your head? Good," Malfoy snarls. "You know, I was mostly joking the other day with the children, or so I thought anyway. I suppose I was operating on the assumption that since you're an adult and I'm an adult, perhaps some of my childhood memories of you and the conclusion I drew from them were a little unfair. Draco, I said to myself as I looked into their wide-eyed little faces and told them you were an insatiable savior complex in ill-fitting trousers, you haven't seen Harry Potter in years. Perhaps he has mellowed with age. Perhaps he's a perfectly lovely chap who finds all the fulfillment he needs from reading a nice book by the fire. Says Harry, who can't help himself. Really? No, of course not really, Malfoy snaps. I've imagined you as a society lady for years, doing all manner of charity work to make yourself feel valuable and important. That's not the point. The point is that I didn't actually think you were truly so unhinged that you would go around trying to rescue people who didn't require any rescuing. It never occurred to me that you might actually do something like this. Dare you just, Harry says, wondering if he's still drunk, call me a society lady? I called you deranged, Malfoy yells, because you are deranged. And he slaps the sheaf of paper in his hand out flat against Harry's bare chest. Harry takes it, shakes it out. It's a copy of The Prophet, emblazoned across the top with the headline, Potter takes lead in museum heist investigation. Underneath are two massive photos. The first is of Malfoy with his black eye, which Harry notices isn't marring his face today, making solemn eye contact with the camera against the backdrop of his ruined parlor. The second is of Harry, coat buttoned to the throat and eyes stormy, stalking towards Grimmauld Place's front gate. "Oh, what?" Harry mutters, horrified. Malfoy snatches the paper back from him before he can even look at the text of the story. Fanning it out dramatically in front of his face, he reads, voice thready with incredulous fury. "Anyone who would do this has more in common with Voldemort than Draco Malfoy ever did? Are you kidding me, Potter? Is this actually your idea of a joke?" "I didn't," Harry says, but then he remembers that he did in fact say that. Just the other day, in fact. "Oh, hell, the lady was a reporter." "That lady was a reporter?" Malfoy parrots in a deep, bored-sounding voice that's clearly supposed to be an imitation of Harry's. Harry scowls at him, even though it kind of makes his head feel like it's going to drop off his neck and roll across the floor. "A likely fucking story, Potter. It was only Illyria Crespar, the most famous byline on the entire bloody paper. Do you have any idea how much work I put into getting that meeting? Do you have any idea how much careful planning went into ensuring the story ran in the Sunday edition, only to have you co-opted like this?" "Oh, come off it, Malfoy," Harry says, irritation growing enough to distract him even from the way his stomach is churning unpleasantly. "I didn't do it on purpose. It's not like it's not like I said anything horrible about you. I thought you wanted to get it out there, however you could. Anyway, even if it meant walking around with a blacked eye for 2 days, I'm sure this'll help with that." "I don't need your help," Malfoy shouts, this at a volume so oppressive that Harry has to close his eyes and sway where he stands for a moment. "What I needed was for the story I planned to run, maybe below the fold or in the art section, somewhere other collectors and curators might see it. What I needed was an opportunity to rally a bit of community support, not for the boy who fucking lived to compare my little no-theft museum break-in to the greatest evil to threaten Wizarding Britain in the modern age. Gorge!" He adds, voice practically curdling with sarcasm. "I wonder if it'll occur to anyone that I used to work for the same dastardly villain, or do I hope nobody thinks to ask if this isn't what I deserve for my past crimes?" "People were going to ask that anyway," Harry snaps, at the end of his rope, hangover and frustration and just fucking Malfoy ganging up on him to make him blunt. "That's the only reason I even said it, all right? I didn't know she was a reporter. She was just some woman on your lawn. I thought she was one of your appointments or something. And she said, 'Isn't it awful that had happened to the museum?' And I said it was. And she said, 'Don't you think this is what Malfoy had coming?' And I told her where she could shove it." Harry glares at Malfoy, furious, even though it hurts to hold his eyes open for so long. "I wasn't trying to co-opt your story or rescue you against your will or be a society lady or whatever else you're accusing me of. I just thought she was being unfair, so I said so. God!" He adds, a little winded in this state from forcing so many words out of his mouth. Malfoy gives him a long measured look. Harry stares back, and after a moment has the pleasure of watching him deflate a little. Tension bleeding from his shoulders, redness fading from his cheeks, fury draining swift and sure out of his eyes. Eventually, a little stiffly, Malfoy says, "Oh, yeah," Harry says, and only resists the urge to roll his eyes because he has the sneaking suspicion that doing so in his current condition might kill him. "Was there anything else? Because I'd really like to go back to wishing for death on my sofa, if it's all the same to you." "Well, you still shouldn't have done it," Malfoy says, maliciously, but not with any real heat behind it. "And don't you have any hangover potion? I know you were always perfectly hopeless at brewing, but they do sell that stuff pre-made, you know." Harry yawns, another huge cracking one. "I don't keep it in the house," he says. "It's cheating." "God save us all from the nobility of the Gryffindor spirit." Malfoy draws, sarcasm heavy on the words. "I mean, honestly, of all the stupid, self-inflicted, idiotic—" He whirls around and out of the apartment without even finishing the sentence, slamming the door behind him. Harry flinches at the noise, thinks briefly that he's going to be sick, changes his mind, goes and brushes his teeth, and then flops back down on the couch to abandon this weirdness for the sweet release of sleep. Or possibly death. Whichever comes first. No sooner has his head hit the cushion, however, than "Potter!" Malfoy calls from the hallway. He knocks again, but only the once and less forcefully. It's more of a tap than anything else. "Let me back in. There's a very strange creature making faces at me from the door across the hall." Harry groans, drags himself upright, and shuffles back over to the door, which he throws open balefully. Waiting on his threshold is Malfoy again. He seems to be glaring at the Christmas decoration that are still on Mrs. Across-the-Way's door. Harry thinks they've been up for too long, too, but he's never stooped to accusing them of sentience about it. "It's Rudolph, the rat-nosed reindeer, Malfoy," he says. He puts a finger to each of his temples and rubs, not that it helps much. "A Muggle thing for Christmas, made of paper. Definitely not making faces at you." "Are you sure?" Malfoy says, still looking at the cardboard reindeer with very hesitation. "Very sure." "Well, it's February in any case," Malfoy says. "Very poor taste." And he steps past Harry and into the apartment without waiting to be invited. Harry's just about to ask what kind of taste it's in to invade someone else's home without asking before 7 a.m. when Malfoy thrusts a little corked vial at him. "Here." Harry looks down at the bottle, the telltale neon green answering the question even as he asks it. "Wait, is this hangover potion?" "No, it's deadliest poison," Malfoy says, rolling his eyes. "All part of my cunning plan to murder you, Potter. Yes, of course it's hangover potion. I won't have you telling the press that I left you here in the throes of agony the next time you decide to speak to them." Heartily, Harry begins. "I didn't decide to." "Oh, I know," Malfoy snaps, waving a hand. "My God, you are irritating. Just take the potion and shut up about it, all right? Assuming you're even capable of that." Harry, who thinks that's pretty rich coming from Malfoy, should throw the potion back in his face and tell him to get out. But, well, he does feel pretty awful. "Fine." He uncaps the vial and holds eye contact with Malfoy as he lifts it to his lips. But Malfoy, the little bastard, doesn't even have the decency to look away. And so Harry ends up drinking the whole thing down with their eyes locked. It's weird, the potion pouring sweet relief through every inch of him, as the weight of Malfoy's gaze makes him want to shift on his feet and rub at the back of his neck. Harry's never felt anything quite like it before. He's not sure he likes it, but he's not entirely sure he dislikes it either. Maybe, Harry thinks, discomfited, Ron and Hermione and even Blaise Zabini all have a bit of a point. "There," Malfoy says brightly, when Harry's drunk the last drop and pulled the vial from his lips. "You already look much less like you've spent months in Azkaban. This was clearly a success. I can't wait to read all about it in future profit articles. Draco Malfoy saved me a humiliating death covered in my own sick," says former top citizen Harry Potter. "He's the real hero." "You are," Harry says. When Malfoy's eyes widen satisfyingly in shock, he continues, "For not going into journalism, I mean. That's a real service to the country you did there. You should get a medal." "For your information," Malfoy starts, and then his eyes seem to focus for the first time this morning on something beyond Harry. They back out a little and he stops talking. After a second, Harry caves and waves a hand in front of Malfoy's face. "Hello? Earth to Malfoy. For more information, what?" "Oh my God," Malfoy says, his eyes snap back to Harry's, and Harry takes an instinctive step back at the expression on his face. "Potter?" he demands. "Do you live here?" Says Harry. "Yes." "Oh my God," Malfoy repeats. He steps past Harry and with an awfully cavalier disregard of basic courtesy for somebody who was raised in a manor house with peacock, starts poking around, opening doors and peering into air vents. Harry feels much better after the potion, but would still like to take a nice 7 or 8 hour nap. He decides he's going to need coffee if he's going to deal with Malfoy at this hour of the day. Coffee and sustenance and possibly some sort of mood-stabilizing potion, although, admittedly, he's not entirely sure which one of them it would be for. "Oh my God," Malfoy calls from inside of Harry's bedroom. He takes it back. Definitely Malfoy gets the mood stabilizer. Harry goes into the kitchen rather than confront whatever the source of Malfoy's distress is this time. He pulls potatoes and coffee from the pantry, a rush of bacon and a carton of eggs from the fridge, and sets to work. The potatoes slice up easily with a spell, and Harry scoops them into a skillet, starts to range. The enchanted coffee maker Hermione bought him as a housewarming gift years ago is already drawing the beans out of the bag and grinding them. He's just laying slices of bacon out into a cold pan when, "Potter!" Malfoy says, bursting into the kitchen. He looks around like a wild man and makes a wounded little sound. "Oh God, this might be worse than the rest. This might be the worst part. I didn't think anything could be worse than the bathroom, but this is so terrible. It's enough to make a grown man weep." "What are you on about?" Harry says, placidly enough. Malfoy's clearly mad, but Harry doesn't mind his insane prattling so much when he's got something else to focus on. As if in response to this, Malfoy throws something at Harry's head. Harry catches it automatically and then recognizes it as his third favorite sweater, a black one with thin white stripes that's impossibly soft to the touch. He's pretty sure it's dirty, but he's not about to tell Malfoy that, so... "Clothe yourself," Malfoy says imperiously, "and tell me how long you've lived in this dwelling." Harry rolls his eyes, but he pulls the sweater over his head. Pointedly he says, "About 7 years, Malfoy, give or take." "Aha!" Malfoy says, and points a wild finger at Harry. Harry has an uncomfortable flash of recognition for a gesture he directed at Hermione not 3 days ago, and busies himself with stirring the potatoes. "I knew it!" Harry makes a face at his hash browns. "You knew what?" "I can't believe you threw over Grimmauld Place for this heap," Malfoy says. I always assumed that you'd, I don't know, had a palace built for you beneath the Thames, for your great service to wizard kind or something." "Oh, sure," says Harry dry. "Totally natural thing to assume. Who wouldn't guess that?" "But I never," Malfoy continues, as if Harry hadn't spoken, "thought that you might have abandoned her to live in a squalor. One of the greatest and most ancient wizarding homes in Britain, the likes of which hasn't been seen in easily 500 years, and you tossed her aside like yesterday's garbage for this?" "I did not," Harry says, turning away from his breakfast in incredulity. "Toss Grimmauld Place aside like yesterday's garbage? Oh, please, of course you did." Malfoy folds his arm and glares at him. At a bit of a remove, Harry wonders if this is what our conversations with Malfoy are like, just ping-ponging from one dramatic accusation to the next until somebody gives up or falls over, or if it's just him. Then he remembers the overheard conversation between Malfoy and Zabini the other day and turns abruptly back to the relative safety of his fry-up. Leaving aside the condition, Malfoy still talking, apparently completely unfazed by having a back turned on him mid-rant, which, of course, we should not leave aside, because it was horrific. "Potter, come on, you've waved the unbreakable. You might as well have spat on the front step on your way out." "What are you even talking about?" says Harry, who feels like he's said this a lot more to Malfoy in just the last few days than he ever has, cumulatively, to anyone else. "I waved what?" "You waved what? The unbreakable, Potter!" Malfoy crosses a small kitchen to lean against the counter next to Harry's stovetop, arms still crossed. "The binding spell to ensure that the new owner won't harm the home on pain of death? They must have at least sent you the paperwork." Harry thinks back. "Huh, yeah, I guess I remember that. Seems a bit extreme though, doesn't it? What if somebody, I don't know, wants to knock out a wall or something? Make a room a little bigger?" "Knock out a what?" Malfoy repeats, his accent so thick it could cut glass. "Well, sure," Harry says and turns to Bacon. Or redo a bathroom or something. I don't know. I just thought... If you want to make a bigger room in a wizarding home, you don't knock out a wall. Malfoy nearly shouts. Harry almost drops his spatula. You take a mixture of salt and powdered dragon's and you walk the new layout of the house, and then you make sure the salt line isn't broken, and then you sprinkle on a few drops of blood and you go to bed. And in the morning, Potter, your home has kindly moved the wall that's so offended and done a much better job of it than you would have without suffering any chaos or agony in the process. You still talk about them like they're alive, Harry says. Malfoy throws his hands in the air. They are alive. How could you not? He fixes Harry with a stern look, drops his arm to his side and sighs. In a different tone, almost as if to himself, he says, Okay, you were raised by muggles and you know nothing. That's the explanation. You just know nothing. I always thought, perhaps it might be that, but the thought depressed me terribly on the old girl's behalf, so, okay, elementary magical theory. Practically a square one. Any magic that sticks around long enough develops a personality. Harry scowls and only just barely doesn't say, I don't know nothing. Oh, come on, not any magic. Any magic, Malfoy repeats. If it's around long enough, yes, Potter, it does. Haven't you ever encountered a magical object and known somewhere deep that it was evil? In fact, scratch that, I know you have. I've seen you myself in Borgins and Burks. Malfoy, Harry exclaims, we were 12, and that alters my point. How? Malfoy looks at him coolly as Harry takes the bacon out of the pan, pours some of the grease into the cup, and cracks eggs into what's left. You were there. You saw what there was to see. You know I'm right. Any magic that's been around long enough develops a personality. Not always evil, of course, but certainly always extant. You build something as powerful as a wizarding house and take care of it for a century or two, then yes, for all intent and purposes, it absolutely is alive, if not in precisely the same way as you or me. Which is why, Malfoy adds, they even came up with the unbreakable part of the changing of houses in the first place, so that your enemies couldn't secretly buy a property and then murder it. Harry shrugs and flips the eggs. I'm sorry, Malfoy. That all sounds pretty balmy to me. Oh, for the love of... Fine. Don't take my word for it. Ask anyone you know who was raised wizarding. Ask Weasley for all I care. They'll all tell you the same thing. Malfoy subsides finally into a sulky sort of silence, which leaves Harry to stare down at the range full of fully cooked food and conclude, rather horrified with himself, that he has made enough breakfast for 2 people. He has a moment of panicked indecision. What is a person supposed to do in this situation? Should Harry just load enough breakfast for himself onto the plate and go sit down at the table and eat it? That's got to be rude. He'd think it was rude if somebody left a full portion of food on the stove and didn't at least offer him some. Wasteful, too. But what's he supposed to say? Hey, Malfoy, what are your feelings on the most important meal of the day? Christ, maybe he really is still drunk. Hangover potion or no. But then Malfoy takes a deep breath, and Harry can just tell he's about to start again, on the thing with the prophet, or the thing with the house, or God knows what else, and suddenly it's the easiest thing in the world. Look, Malfoy, Harry says, do you want some breakfast? Malfoy's mouth snaps shut. He stares at Harry for a second, eyes widening just a little, the way they had, Harry remembers, when an intruder's fist was hovering threateningly over that little crystal vase. Do I want some breakfast? Malfoy repeats faintly after a moment. Harry could just kill him for not saying yes or no, for leaving Harry standing here like this, feeling so helplessness. Harry could just kill him for not saying yes or no, for leaving Harry standing here like this, feeling so helplessly, hopelessly awkward. He'll be damned if he'll let Malfoy see that, though, so he forces one shoulder up into a shrug. You know, eggs, bacon, something when something rings a bell. You cook, Malfoy says, looking slowly from Harry to the range as though noticing it for the first time. Harry raises his eyebrows. What exactly did you think I was doing here? Oh, I don't know, Malfoy snaps irritably. Then he pauses, the line of his mouth going funny just for a moment. I suppose it doesn't smell terrible. Wow, Malfoy, Harry says, rolling his eyes and grabbing some chives to top the eggs with out of the fridge. Careful with the gratuitous praise there. My hat might swell up. Malfoy lets out a little noise that Harry thinks might be a stifled laughter. By the time he's turned back from the fridge, Malfoy's face is impassive again, and he can't tell. Honestly, this is unbearable. Look, Harry says, slicing the chives with more force than is really required. If you already ate or whatever, it's... Sure, Malfoy says before Harry can finish the sentence. Harry shoots a glance at him, and Malfoy flushes slightly, looks away. Fine, breakfast, why not? Great, Harry mutters. He thought getting an answer would cut the awkwardness of the thing, but he was obviously mistaken, because Malfoy's never-ending stream of chatter seems to have ceased entirely as Harry gets plates and cups, doles out portions. It's strange. If Harry'd had to guess a minute ago, he'd have said it would be a relief to turn off that particular tap for a moment. Instead, he finds himself wishing Malfoy would start up again, save Harry from this empty, endless desert, where something to say should be. They sit down at his little two-person folding table, and Harry has to move some stuff off the other chair, and Malfoy doesn't say anything pithy about how Harry is a slob or living in a squalor or eating in the kitchen like an animal when he could have lived like a king in an ancient estate with an emotional profile. He just sits down and kind of nods at Harry and frowns down at his breakfast and takes a bite. Harry's desperate enough to consider bringing up the weather when Malfoy thankfully says, I say, Potter, this is actually not terrible. It's the actually that really sells that, thanks, Harry says. He hopes his voice comes out dry, as opposed to so relieved he's a bit ashamed of himself. That little underestimation incident from before affected me more deeply than you know, Malfoy says. He spears a potato and, in what he clearly imagines a reassuring tone, adds, I dropped my expectations very low. Great, Harry says, rolling his eyes. So I assume I'll be receiving a stern letter at the office about how I'm going to bungle the investigation then? Oh, they are low than that, Potter. What do you take me for? He chews and swallows a bite of bacon thoughtfully. I give you until end of this week, tops, before you are living in a box next to the river. This would be the river with my secret underground palace for service rendered, would it? Oh, quite, Malfoy says, mouth quirking up at the corners. Of course they won't let you in there anymore by the end of the week. You will have urinated on a public figure and set several tourist attractions on fire by then. Very down on that sort of thing, the secret palace people. I thought it was my palace, Harry says, distantly aware that his entire conversation is completely bonkers and just not caring very much. Shouldn't a man be allowed to do what he likes in his own home? Within reason, Potter, within reason. Malfoy's actually honestly smiling, though it's directed at his plate and not Harry. Anyway, these tourist attractions are all much too large to fit under the Thames, and I don't know how you'd lure a public figure down there to pee on them. Harry gives up and laughs, really laughs, the noise loud enough to fill the room. He can't help himself. It's funny and completely bizarre, and so unexpectedly easy that he's not entirely sure what to do with himself. You're completely mental, Harry says, a little laughter still riding on the words. Has anyone ever told you that? Do you know, I've heard it before. This smile Malfoy does direct at Harry. It's slow, lazy, entertained. Never quite seen it myself. The silence that falls between them this time is almost companionable, and Harry's getting used to it, God help him, maybe even enjoying it, when Malfoy lets out a little huff of laughter, only half vocalized, but undeniable this time. Harry raises his eyebrows. What? Oh, it's just, Malfoy says and shakes his head, releases a little huff of laugh again. Well, it's just a bit surreal, isn't it? He gestures back and forth between them to the coffee and plates. I mean, for one thing, I think at some point during school I swore a solemn oath that I'd never break bread with you. This is a little surreal, says Harry. Did it escape your attention that we ate practically every meal together for the better part of 6 years? That didn't count, Malfoy says. He takes a haughty sip of his coffee while Harry stares at him, waiting for the explanation, which, sure enough, we were separated by, how did I phrase it? 2 full tables and a chasm between our disparate ideologies. He gives his fork a loaded look. I believe that, technically, I'm supposed to tear out my entrails and burn them now. You'll forgive me if I let that one slide. The chasm, Harry repeats, between our disparate ideologies. I was a gifted child, Malfoy says, nodding as though he's agreeing with a thought Harry has already proposed. I had the wrong end of the ideological stick, obviously, but nevertheless I was the envy of all my schoolmates, and of course of their parents who only wished they'd produced offspring so naturally brilliant. Brilliant enough to want to burn your own entrails, were you? Oh, I didn't want to, Malfoy says, as though Harry is the crazy one. But it's not good laying out an edict without an appropriately weighted punishment, is it? The point was that I would burn them, not that I particularly hoped to ever have to do so. How else was I to make sure I never violated the rule? I don't know, Harry says, mock thoughtful. How about the fact that we would have started a food fight in about 8 seconds if you ever forgot about the, chasm and gave it a go? Malfoy smiles at him again. This one is smaller but more honest, Harry thinks somehow. It makes him feel like he's won something. Well, sure, when you put it like that. There's another nearly comfortable silence, and then Harry says, I did forget to do the toast, actually, so technically we didn't, break any bread. Well, Potter, Malfoy says, swallowing his last mouthful of food. He's cleaned his plate, which Harry is weirdly gratified by. That might be the cleverest thing I've ever heard you say. Harry rolls his eyes instead of answering, stands, clears their plates. He's placing them in the sink when something occurs to him, and he walks back over to where Malfoy is leaning back in his chair, eyes closed, one hand resting on his stomach, looking strangely but inarguably like a contented house cat. Hey, Malfoy. How do you know where I live? Harry says. What? Oh, Malfoy says, eyes blinking open. Blaise. Zabini, Harry demands. How does he know where I live? Malfoy smirks at him. Blaise is an unspeakable, Potter. He knows where everyone lives, and probably also whether or not they enjoy living there, and almost certainly where on the property they've buried any bodies. He absorbs that piece of information slowly. It pulls at something at the back of his mind, a hazy memory. Potter? Malfoy says, sounding vaguely alarmed. You're not going to off one about, I don't know, personal privacy or something, are you? Because honestly, I think it's a bit late for all of that. You had plenty of opportunities to kick me out. No, it's not that, Harry says slowly. He's almost gutted. I think maybe I ran into Zabini last night. Malfoy's body language changes in an instant. He snaps right up in his chair, abandoning his indolent pose as if it never was at all, and demands, What, at the Gryffindor piss-up? Okay, seriously, how did you know that it was a Gryffindor piss-up? Harry says. If you're stalking me, you're very bad at it. You've really tipped your hand. Oh, everyone knows about the Gryffindor piss-up, Malfoy says, waving a hand, though Harry thinks his cheeks might be very faintly pink. Once a month at the Bawdy Bowtruckle. Everyone's invited, except for my loathed enemies. Potter, focus, you saw Blaise there. Oh, I think maybe just outside, Harry says. It's coming back to him. Not any of the details, those are probably lost forever. But certainly the vague shape of the thing. He made me sit on a bench. I was, pretty far gone, to be honest. I would have never guessed. Malfoy says, sarcasm thick. You looked fresh as a daisy when I got here. Oh, shut up, Harry mutters. Anyway, he said something about channels, I think, and I'm pretty sure he called you a name. So you talked about me, says Malfoy. His tone is very calm, which, for some reason, Harry finds a little frightening. Maybe, he hedges, but honestly, all I remember is that he kept trying to, flatter me or something, butter me up. It was really weird. That's how Blaise gets information. It's actually, never mind. I don't have time to do this with you right now, Malfoy says. He drops his napkin on his plate, sighs, and stands up. His eyes, Harry notices, have gone a bit wild again. I have a previous engagement that I was unaware of until this very moment. I must be off. I think he must have got me home too, Harry says, realizing he doesn't actually recall at all how he got back here last night. Then he processes what Malfoy said. Oh, okay, you're not going to, burn out his entrails or anything, are you? Just because, it'd be my duty to stop you. No harm will come to Blaise that Blaise doesn't entirely deserve, Malfoy says, which Harry notes is not exactly a no. You're going to go kick on his door too, aren't you? Harry says. Malfoy glares at him, and Harry raises his hand in the air. Hey, I'm just stating the facts as I see them. You're the one who comes around to other people's places and kicks on their doors and tells them houses have feelings or something. That's, Malfoy says appalled, it's so wrong. I can't even begin to, look, I'm leaving, I am, but we're circling back to this another day, all right? Please pencil it in somewhere amongst the several insipid and burdensome visits I assume I will shortly be receiving from you and your staff. And the thing is that it's mean what he's saying. It should bother Harry, like overhearing more or less the same thing the other day did, whether he wanted to admit it to himself or not. But Malfoy's smiling very slightly as he says it. So small and quick you could miss it. And when he gets to the door, he stops, turns, looks Harry in the eye, and then looks very quickly away. Says quietly to some spot on the far wall, "Potter, thanks for breakfast." If Harry grins at the door for half a minute after he's gone, well, he's still a little drunk. To be continued. Thank you for listening to What We Pretend We Can't See by Gyzym, read by Alamex Mabella. If you would like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on YouTube, Spotify, AO3, Instagram, or Tumblr.